I've always had a love for Fox's X-Men films, well, most of them. In a way, they were the closest thing we had to the MCU before the actual MCU came into existence. And even though there really wasn't an overarching story that was built up for several films, like with the MCU's Infinity Saga, I think that was a good thing, as that meant that each film could just focus more on telling a more contained story rather than just being devoted to set up future films. They've already proven this with great films like Deadpool and the masterpiece Logan, and even Days of Future Past served as a great crossover between the older and newer films in the series. Now, with this film in particular, the reception has been pretty awful for the most part, with many saying it's the worst in the series. Hell, it even has a lower rating on Rotten Tomatoes than X-Men Origins Wolverine. While I was a little skeptical that there could be an X-Men film worse than that thing, I still had little doubt in my mind that it was going to be a pretty bad film. For one, the production of this film was pretty messy with tons of rewrites and reshoots, like it was going to be a two-parter at one point and was originally going to be released in 2018, but because of poor test screenings, they had to reshoot the entire third act. Just all of these aren't good signs for any film production, so admittedly, I did have pretty low expectations. Not saying I wanted it to be bad or to fail in any way, because I do want to see the story of the Phoenix Saga done right in a film. And I do want this series to continue, and to be honest, I really don't want the X-Men to be integrated into the MCU. The concept of mutants being discriminated can't work in the MCU, as the universe is already too fantastical with so many super beings flying around and being praised. I understand that they may do something different, but for me, it's just really disrespectful to just cancel and ignore this series because Disney wants more money. They should just let Fox keep making them. Besides, I think Fox is willing to take several risks that Disney probably wouldn't. Their films are generally a bit darker and more brutal and violent, and if Disney always owned X-Men, films like Logan and Deadpool probably wouldn't exist or just be really tame and boring, because God forbid Disney make an R-rated film. Think of the children. That all said, upon viewing Dark Phoenix, I did not see a bad film. In fact, I was surprised to find myself enjoying it quite a bit actually, though there were certainly really messy moments that do heavily drag parts of it down. They never really quite ruined the film for me. The only real, fuck you movie moment was when Mystique said the whole change the name to X-Women line, which hands down is easily the worst line of dialogue in the entire series. But to be fair, her character was unexpectedly killed shortly after this, so I guess that makes up for it. Starting with X-Men Apocalypse, Mystique has degenerated quite a bit in terms of her character, and even performance by Jennifer Lawrence, as now she's just giving off the impression that she just doesn't want to be there. Also, the makeup on her this time is pretty lacking compared to previous installments. It looks really half-assed and just looks lazy. And no, I don't care if it's a lot of worker stress on the actress. This movie has a $200 million budget. This kind of laziness is unacceptable. Moving on, beside from that, I was really into the rest of the characters as the X-Men finally have what they've always wanted to achieve, that being mutant equality. And with the rise of the Phoenix threatening all of this, it led to some pretty interesting conflict, as it kind of becomes an X-Men Civil War type movie at one point, that I thought was actually pretty cool given that both sides have compelling reasons for fighting each other over the Phoenix. Now, if anything saves the film, it's the rest of the characters and the acting, and a lot of that comes from the fact that they've had so much development over the years. For me, the best parts in this are when the characters are just interacting and talking with each other. Aside from Mystique and Quicksilver, who does jack shit in this, which is a damn shame because I thought they would build on his connection to Magneto, but whatever, I guess. Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy continue to shine in their roles, as well as some of the new cast that was introduced in Apocalypse, like Storm and Nightcrawler, and Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, who was more compelling as a character in this because of his relationship with Jean Grey. Now, with this film revolving around Jean Grey, I thought the film did a good job at fleshing out her character, and Sophie Turner's performance in this is much better than it was in Apocalypse, as in that it seemed like she was really just struggling to maintain an American accent. In this, she's believably able to convey her struggle with controlling the Phoenix, and the fact that there are severe consequences to her losing control, like Mystique dying, make it that more compelling. And I will admit, there are a lot of really compelling things here. the characters dealing with Mystique's death, Magneto's conversation with the soldiers on Genosha, Xavier hiding the truth from Jean, and the mutants wanting to keep the peace. It's all very compelling stuff. It's just that the story just needed more weight and a bit more focus to be a truly great film. The villains in this don't help that either. The Dabari are a little cool and eerie when they are introduced, but they become pretty silly afterward. And a big problem is that their power seems to be very random, and they don't use it in situations that they should. Like, they seem to be powerfully telekinetic, but when they're fighting, they don't use it to, like, crush their enemies' skulls or something. And their acting is pretty bad as they're just emotionless and bland, and I don't really blame this on Jessica Chastain and the rest of the actors, as it was probably the direction they were given, which is unfortunate since Simon Kinberg was doing a pretty decent job overall with this being his directorial debut. I honestly think it would have been better to remove them and just focus more on Jean losing control while being on her own. Now, there is a lot of really good action in this, with the standout being the train battle towards the end, as everyone gets to use their powers in very creative ways, and no one feels too outmatched. However, there is this one fight scene in a street, and while it is fun, it does seem a bit odd how Magneto didn't just end it all there, as there were like cars and metal objects everywhere. There are other small instances of this, but those are really just nitpicks. Look, this is certainly nowhere near as bad as people say it is. Personally speaking, I would rank it above Origins, obviously, the first X-Men, Apocalypse, Deadpool 2, and The Last Stand, and I feel like this does the Phoenix Saga justice better than that did. I understand saying that something is better than something that isn't highly regarded may not sound like much, but besides Origins and maybe Deadpool 2, I don't consider the rest to be bad films. There's a good amount of intrigue in this, and while it is explored fairly averagely, it also had the potential of being a real tragic story about Jean Grey. And it's a shame that we'll never be able to see these characters again, not because of story reasons, but because of Disney's insatiable lust to own everything. But at least this does kind of wrap up the franchise in a way that's honestly a little bittersweet. Like at the end, seeing Charles and Eric play chess just one last time, I did kind of tear up a bit, and I was just thinking, damn, I'm gonna miss these guys.